We're making an ad.
Napping ad.
This is where I think if we're doing it right, Alec Baldwin comes in. He says a couple things. He listens to the podcast every week.
Yep.
Has he been canceled? Wait, is Alec Baldwin the one who killed somebody? I hear that Gary Sinise is free.
Oh, okay, great.
He hasn't worked since 2020.
So, what would be the script that we would have Gary Sinise say for the Napping Through Happy Hour podcast?
Listen to this damn show. Damn it.
The Napping Through Happy Hour podcast, brought to you by Geekscape.
Real life, real drama, real time.
I'm Gary Sinise.
That's the ad. That's the ad. That's the ad.
It is mind-blowing
and heartbreaking
how many original scripts are written every year but are never made.
So we seek out these scripts and bring them to life with full audio production and professional actors.
Check us out at Undiscovered Scripts,
Movies made of paper.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Free!
Everybody, and welcome to another episode of Horror Movie Night. This week, we're breaking the rules just a little bit because there's a new movie dropping in theaters, The Strangers Chapter 1. And I said to myself, well, the first Strangers movie isn't really a Horror Movie Night movie, but I think the Strangers sequel, Prey at Night, has at least a few elements that fit our bill. So I went ahead and picked it. And before we even dive into this, I have to mention something because I did not realize this until today. So there's going to be 3 Strangers films coming out within a year of each other.
Wait, what?
Yeah, similarly to like X, Pearl, and Maxine. It's Strangers chapters 1, 2, and 3. Do you know who's directing all 3 of those movies?
No.
Remy Harling.
What?
That blew my mind.
Weird. That is odd.
That is the strangest director choice I could imagine for a trilogy of Strangers movies. But anyway, so the thing about this movie, and when I picked it, I was like, I remember this movie being really fun and really 80s and really like not as much of a home invasion movie as the first film. And I was like half right, but half wrong. I feel like this movie starts off as the typical what you expect the Strangers home invasion movie to be. Yeah. And then the third act just goes high gear, like trashy 80s sequel tropes. And like, that's what I love about it. Like, I think that the third act of this movie is some of the most fun I've had watching a horror movie in theaters in a really long time. But I will apologize because it's kind of a dour first 45 minutes.
Bro, it was heavy. It was, but that's also like, how do you not make the Strangers heavy, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, you need to have some connective tissue. I think obviously a few people have seen the new Strangers, but I think the biggest concern is that like the Strangers just show up because you're home, and if you start giving them more like reason or more like not just picking a random person's house, then you start to go a little haywire. So this one really towed the line. It's like sort of vacation or like family vacation thing is different than just like going to someone's home. But at least it's a family member. Like the connective tissue was still there for me, and it did. You're right. The last half of it was a lot more fun than the first.
Yeah,
I didn't love that. I didn't love how I was feeling.
So something that I think is really weird about both of the Strangers films is that they really don't tell you what the time period is for any of them, and like this movie doesn't say what time it is, but like my read has always been that it's 80s. Like it's 80s music.
It's not. It's not.
But it's not.
There are cell phones. There are smartphones.
That's what I mean. I think that both of the films do this cool thing where they kind of exist in just like a weird like this weird anything can happen, because like, yes, they're cell phones, right? But like the reverse of that is in the very beginning. I wrote this down because this movie's from 2018. He gets in the car and says, "Mom and Dad are going broke from sending you to boarding school." And the dad says, "No, we're not." And he says, "Then why did you cancel the cable?" And like, what kid in 2018 gives a shit about the cable anymore? You know what I mean?
But then plenty of parents that age are cutting the cable, right? So it's like, so it works.
I think that's just bad writing, which is funny because I don't think this movie has a lot of bad writing. So this movie really surprised me. I was not looking forward to the watch. I was expecting to be like entertained by some of the brutality, but I was not expecting it to be good.
Yeah.
Because Matt even like undersold it for me.
Yeah.
I think this is a good slasher movie. I really do. Like I am pretty impressed with it.
Me too.
And I feel like this movie, I would have never watched this movie if Matt wouldn't have picked it for the show, because I hate home invasion movies. I absolutely hate them. It's my like top 3 least favorite kinds of subgenre of horror.
And even if you like this one, I still don't recommend watching The Strangers, because The Strangers
I'm never
is
watching The Strangers.
The Strangers is everything you expect a home invasion movie to be. I will say the following things about The Strangers personally. I think it's a masterfully made movie, and it's genuinely one of the scariest films I've personally watched. But if you are not a home invasion movie, you are not going to have a good time watching it. So like, it's just as a friend, I'm like, knowing what you don't like, don't do it. But I saw Kyle nodding. Like, I think he can agree. Like the artfulness in which that movie is done, and it's, I would say, the very beginning of where I see the difference here. Right. When I watched this in theaters, the first half of this movie, I kind of was hating it because I love the first Strangers so much. Yeah. And it reminded me of when I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake in like 2005. Yeah. And like every single part of my fandom of the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, I'm like, you're showing what Leatherface looks like under the mask. What the fuck are you doing here? Why are you explaining? Like, you get like so angry at what you think is like the essence of what makes that first movie so good. With The Strangers, what I think makes the first Strangers movie so good is that there's really no score at all, right? Like the whole movie plays out basically in silence. There's no like stingers to make you be like, now's the time to be scared. Like if you're just not paying attention and a character shows up in the background, you don't notice that the character showed up in the background. This movie immediately throws that out the window. It's like the first scene is like stingers and score letting you know that it's time to be scared by what's happening.
Yeah. I never got to finish the first Strangers. I got a DVD from a closed down Blockbuster, and the last act basically of it, the disc was scratched, and I could never save it, and I never went back because I was so scared. I was like, I don't care. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Blockbuster.
It's a good scary movie, but this, like, here's what I wrote down a little monologue, and I'm gonna read it here. Well, it's 2 parts. I said, it's crazy to me that this movie starts so dark and is a bit of a bummer, and then right around the pool scene, it turns into a really solid, like, Halloween or Friday the 13th sequel. And then I wrote this.
You get a fun final girl that you don't really expect to have as a final girl, like, in the grand scheme of things. Like, her whole family's dying.
I genuinely love this pool scene so much. It's the main reason why I wanted to pick this movie. The over-the-top usage of Total Eclipse of the Heart in the soundtrack. The contrast of the dark night with these brightly lit palm tree decorations. The sound of the axe dragging on the ground. The sound cutting in and out as they're in the water, whether the camera's with them in the water or not with the water. And then when the brother gets stabbed, the way the blood just slowly starts to fill the pool, like almost to the point where you don't know who stabbed who for a couple seconds until that moment. Like, I think that is one of the most masterfully shot sequences in a horror movie that we've ever discussed on Horror Movie Night. I think about that specific scene way more than I've thought about most scenes in a movie.
Dude, it was wild, and everything leading up to that bookends it so well too. Like that leads into how fun the pool scene is going to be. Like, because there's still scariness. There's still like fear. Like when the woman runs towards him that first time and he gets her with the golf club.
Yeah.
Like that long lens to watch her run is so crazy. And then you get to watch half of the fight from the other side of the pool. And then, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful sequence. The only thing I remember about the movie being advertised to me was that pool scene. So I kind of thought that they were going to be more at like a hotel. I don't know, like a motel, like a weird vacation motel. But it's a great set piece. Love the neon trees. And which leads me to Trace from New Park. It has palm trees all over it, but I just call them trees.
Trace.
I love it.
Trace.
And I have, and for the listeners, I'm sure you can tell that I am slightly under the weather, trying to fight through having some bronchitis, and I needed something virgin because the kids are in high school, they can't drink alcohol, so I have Urban Artifact Seedless Mango Non-Alcoholic Fruit Tart, and it's really good.
Nice. A little vitamin C too for you. That's
love
good.
it. Love to see it. I don't have a ton of notes on the first half of this movie. I do want to ask Scott, did you know that Joan from Mad Men was going to be one of the leads in this movie?
I knew that she was in this movie, and I also, so my first note was like, man, she was really slumming it in 2018 when she did this. But then it also makes sense that like they kind of did the Drew Barrymore Scream thing where
she's the most famous person in the movie and the first to die.
Yeah, it's the first to die. But what I really want to, I mean, like, I did take notes, but they pretty much peter off by the pool scene because it's just a ride for the last 20 minutes or so. But the part of this movie so what I really loved about this movie, and I really did enjoy this watch. I don't know if I'd watch it again, but I was absolutely captivated because one, there's so much like post-exploitation, post-grindhouse cinematography in it. Like they do these wide shots into a it's like the thing that Tarantino does sometimes, but he's also getting that from grindhouse and exploitation, where they do that zoom, and it's just a very specific like late 70s cinematic thing, and it really works here. But the writing of this movie, it's like, I mean, it kind of loses the note that I have is something to the point of that the writing is so real in what would happen in these situations until it kind of until the last 10 minutes when it kind of stops being realistic, and I'm here for it because I'm like, you can't actually suspend disbelief with reality with that hyper realism through the end of this film. But specifically the scene where the dad and Luke, the son, get back to the trailer that they're staying in, and the dad goes into the bathroom and finds the mom, Christina Hendricks, like ripped to shreds, and his son starts to come in the door, the broken down door, and he like linebackers him basically out the door, and he holds him and he's like, no, we have to leave. That is one of the best pieces of slasher writing in a screenplay that comes to mind. Like, I cannot give that high enough praise because that's so fucking smart. Like, because that's the whole point of like a home invasion movie with adults and their biological children or like adopted children, whatever, is that the parents are trying to, they'll sacrifice themselves for the kids. That's a trope. And this movie really lives in the tropes of slasher movies and home invasion movies. And for the dad to do that and be like, I don't want you to see that is incredible. So smart. It was a great scene, and it also does not linger. I love that none of these like horrific things really linger.
Right.
Because
so here's
like,
what I'm gonna
it's gratuitous, but it's not drawn out to make you just feel like shit, if that makes sense.
I think the other thing that's really smart about this movie is that I would say that the three strangers are fairly iconic looking characters for people who've literally had 2 films that had a 10-year gap between the first and the second one. I think that they're pretty iconic characters. What is nice about this is that in Strangers 1, you literally just have these 3 people. They show up and they just torture this couple, and their one friend. You know what I mean? They win. The end of the movie is they win. They drive away. They've successfully murdered everybody. The end. This movie feels like it's going in that direction, right? And I agree with you. We don't really linger with when they're killing. We don't see them kill the grandparents. We see the after effects of what happens to them. We kind of barely see what happens to the mom or the dad. We see the after effects of those situations too. Where we linger on the gratuitousness and where the actual like excitement is watching the teens. It essentially turns into a revenge film. It turns into the last half of Last House on the Left, where you're watching the parents get revenge on the home invaders. Basically, like it just does this really cool thing where it's juggling all this stuff. I don't think it's accidental, right? Like I wrote down that like the last 5 minutes of this movie, and we got to talk about the last this one scene, but we get almost like a Legend of Sleepy Hollow homage where she's trying to get to the end of the bridge. The bridge, yeah. And then we get an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the very end of her laughing in the back of a truck after taking down this character. Like it wears its horror love all over itself.
The best Christine that Christine could be is this Chevy truck on fucking fire.
That was so sick. Shot's so good. It's fucking good.
It was so good. I loved it because I loved the very specific shot with the headlights but like the low angle there, but then also seeing it kind of come down the hill on fire. Like there's one it's one of those things where it's like I love a reference that can be so on the nose that I act like. This one was so on the nose that I appreciated it. If you sort of like half-assed it or did like a version of it that I was like, well, why'd you put the Christine shot in the thing if you weren't going to make it the shot, right? Same with the Texas Chainsaw thing. Like, I think I can imagine, they probably didn't stick with us, but we've seen how many slashers where a final girl like tries to jump in. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like there's probably a lot of people who try to do that and people don't even realize that's what they're trying to do. And if you can't make the reference and people don't get the fucking reference, then like it's not worth it. This is so clear and beautiful. I really enjoyed it.
I'm going to actually make a quote. I'm going to reference a quote from one of the guests on Weird Algorithm. A couple episodes ago on Weird Algorithm, we had one of the writers of Robot Chicken on our show. And he said something that was so insightful to me, which he's like, on Robot Chicken, very often we would know that we were going to be doing a parody of a thing. And for like the first season or 2, we felt like, all right, we got to rewatch that movie so that we can get like all these deep references. He's like, don't do that. He's like, the stuff that's at the front of your mind is the stuff that's going to be on the front of the mind of everybody else. Yeah. And like, if you go deeper than that, it's just going to be like these, like they're nice Easter eggs, but it's going to be failed jokes because most of the audience watching it hasn't as recently rewatched that movie as you.
That's great.
And I think that like this movie, any of its reference points are front of the mind references to movies. Yeah. It's not like a deeper, this is this really obscure moment to a shot that happened in Halloween 6. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, no, these are the things that you as a horror fan, they're just in your frontal lobe at all times because they're so iconic. Yeah, that scene where the flaming truck is chasing her. And again, it's the usage of these 80s ballads during these scenes
fun.
is so good. It's really fun. It works.
So I felt like, and if we're talking about like homages and references, I felt like that. So Totally Eclipse of the Heart has to be an urban legend reference, right?
Yeah, it has to.
Or I mean, that's Totally Eclipse of the Heart. Yeah. And also the actual score for this movie was very much John Carpenter homage.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so obviously a John Carpenter homage. It sounds like the that theme from Halloween. And I'm like, I wasn't into it. because that was the first thing in the movie that I was like, they're really pushing these references. This reference, it felt derivative, but then when they kind of started to pile up, it had the opposite effect for me, where I was like, oh, this is a if you know kind of thing, but it's also not. I don't know why this gets a pass for me.
It's
this
so
movie
this
has so few things that it should get a pass for, but every single one of them works. Like,
because it's
this
under
movie
90
on
minutes.
paper,
it's under. I mean, that helps too.
It's an hour and 25 minutes or something,
and that's with credits. It's like actually an hour 20.
No, it does everything really well with love, but also tells its own story. It doesn't feel, it doesn't feel like it's rehashing all the tropes. We recognize them, but kind of, I mean, what you're saying.
And I was not expecting the brother to live.
No,
because if he goes up to the man in the mask, I was like, oh, it's over.
Dunzo.
Yeah. I
loved
think
him killing Baby Doll or whatever.
Yeah,
he
yeah.
just like, because he was like, I didn't think he was going to do it. I thought that he was going to, but like, because he held the gun at the one girl's face and then didn't shoot her, and that was a mistake. But then he just very nonchalantly was just like stab, and done. It's so cool.
I mean, what you're talking about, though, Scott, about those references and why does this get a pass and all of that stuff, I think something that's also really telling is if you look at like the IMDb or on the Wikipedia and you're looking at the reviews, the critical response, on Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a 40% rating. And a lot of it is coming from non-horror fans, right? Like the non-horror fans are like, this is such a step down from the original movie. Like, where's all the style?
They wanted more of, okay.
But then it says it mostly received positive reviews from fans of the genre. Bloody Disgusting gave and it's all these positive reviews from like Bloody Disgusting /film. Like the people who get genre fucking love this movie. And Bloody Disgusting has a really great line in here where they said, skillfully, or this was IGN wrote this, skillfully made, spooky, stylish, and featuring some quite smart character work. The Strangers Prey at Night stands much taller than the 2008 original. The central killers are plenty scary, and some of the images on display would make John Carpenter proud. Like, people saw it for what it is. Like, this is a 80s John Carpenter movie. It's almost like a 70s John Carpenter movie that turns into an 80s John Carpenter movie at the halfway mark.
Yeah, man, I'm hard as a rock.
And it never becomes a late 90s, early 2000s John Carpenter movie, which is great.
Thank God for that.
All right, well, I'm really glad that you guys like this, because I was terrified also, like, oh man, they might fucking hate this. But maybe that'll be the case for my next pick.
Dude, Scott said it though. I would never have watched this. Never watched it. So I'm glad we did. It was a lot of fun. Won't watch it again. I think
I love a
first half of
surprise
Dread
like
is-
this.
Yeah,
This is what this show is really
Sometimes
about.
we got to break the rules, and I'm glad we did.
We're making an ad.
Napping ad.
This is where I think if we're doing it right, Alec Baldwin comes in. He says a couple things. He listens to the podcast every week. Yep. Has he been canceled? Was Alec Baldwin the one who killed somebody? I hear that Gary Sinise is free.
Oh, okay, great.
He hasn't worked since 2020.
So, what would be the script that we would have Gary Sinise say for the Napping Through Happy Hour podcast?
Listen to this damn show. Damn it.
The Napping Through Happy Hour podcast, brought to you by Geekscape.
Real life, real drama, real time.
I'm Gary Sinise.
That's the ad. That's the ad. That's the ad.
It is mind-blowing
And heartbreaking.
how many original scripts are written every year but are never made.
So we seek out these scripts and bring them to life with full audio production and professional actors.
Check us out at Undiscovered Scripts,
Movies made of paper.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Free.
It is mind-blowing
And heartbreaking.
how many original scripts are written every year but are never made.
So we seek out these scripts and bring them to life with full audio production and professional actors.
Check us out at Undiscovered Scripts,
Movies made of paper.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Free.
Well, let's talk about double features. Maybe it's just because literally as I was watching this, I was also assembling what is now live on our feeds, a mega episode of every time we discussed a Child's Play movie. But I'm going to pair this with Child's Play 2, which has an equally great final third act. Like, just a great set piece, like, goes from being a close homage to the original to like a really fun stands on its own update for the new decade. Like, I think that while it's completely different tone, like the general vibe stands. So that's what I'm going with. All right.
So I'm gonna say two things. One is a movie that I don't know how you can watch, but it was a documentary done by some friends of mine called The Man in the Mask about Kip Weeks, who played the Man in the Mask in the first Strangers. And it's all about his relationship to the film, what the film did for him, has done for him, but then also him being a dad and having an autistic child, and like how his life has sort of changed. And it's really interesting for particularly horror fans to be like, oh, you were a guy who could like go to horror conventions and do this thing, but you also were a man in a mask for a late 2000s horror movie. And it's like, you know, it's sort of this no man's land of a thing. It's an interesting documentary. It's called The Man in the Mask. I don't know when or how you could see it, but also The Man in the Mask just gives me the warm fuzzies for the Town That Dreaded Sundown remake, which has it has some meta-ness, it has some referential, like more direct meta referential stuff, obviously, but it still is like this very cool visual thing. It's a lot of fun. Like, there still is just a killer who kind of kills for no reason. This one has more reason, but it would be a fun one to pair it with.
All right.
No, I think that would be a really good fit, actually, the Town That Dreaded Sundown remake. I was going to go 1 year forward from Strangers Prey at Night and go with Ready or Not, but as you were talking about that, I'm like, no, I have to go with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, because I think that's another super smart, super entertaining discussion, like meta discussion of the genre that I haven't talked about on the show relatively recently. I used to talk about it constantly, and so you know, like let's bring that back.
Yeah, bring up the numbers.
Yes, gotta bump those numbers up.
If you've enjoyed this episode, maybe you'll enjoy much more of Horror Movie Night. I highly recommend going to patreon.com/HMN podcast, where you can get a bunch of cool stuff, including video where you can see Scott showing off his new Silly Goose t-shirt, which you can find on our website. Go to hmnpodcast.com, get some Silly Goose, get some Cutie Patootie, get some VHS keychains. We got all types of shit up on our websites for you to buy and check out. And Kyle, I believe you have a screening on the horizon.
Yes, I don't know. I don't think I announced it here on the show, but Ouchie's going to have its world premiere at Chattanooga Film Festival, which is fucking insane. It's really, really special. It's a really special festival. To me, I premiered The Woodsman there, and it's one of those things where it's like, that's cool, and you don't know if you're going to be able to go back, right? Like, you don't know, and you just try to, you know, you develop relationships, you have a good time, but like, still the film has to fit into programming somehow. And Chris Dortch and the rest of the Chattanooga crew thought that Ouchie would fit, and we're super excited to go premiere there. This year is the 11th year, and they're doing a Twilight Zone celebration. They're also premiering a bunch of stuff. They have the stylist Jill Gavargazarian, excuse me, that's probably not how it is. I call her Jill 6, but her new one, Ghost Game, is going to be down there. And like I said, of course, Ouchie is going to be there. So we're really excited about that. That's June 21st through the 23rd in person, June 21st through the 28th virtual. And listen, I know not everybody can make a physical festival, but the virtual festival that Chattanooga does is unreal. You'll get access to a Discord server. Like, you can talk to other film festival goers, virtual and in person, through that platform. Like, I cannot recommend a better way to see new genre oddball stuff than going to that. And this is not an ad. This is just
but we've
very
had
exciting.
I will say that we have had a friend of the show who works very closely with that particular film festival, who has literally said, like, you whenever the year works out, we'll get horror movie night down there. It's just been difficult to figure out. So shout out to friend Brian Berger of the show, who's usually at it every year, has shorts in there and all that other good jazz. He's been like, come on down, do Chattanooga one of these years. It's just a financial thing to try to figure out. But
same. It just independently is very difficult. I can only imagine. The other thing, which I know I'm saying a lot, is that Horror Finds, which I've talked about on the show many a times, and I've had for over 10 years, is going to close. Horror Finds is for the uninitiated, the vintage Etsy store that I had. That was selling a lot of horror paperbacks from hell, novelizations. At some point in time, I was doing a good chunk of vinyl. It just has anything that is like horror or horror adjacent, even like occult stuff, alien stuff, whatever, that I found interesting in my treasure hunting. I don't collect a lot of stuff, but I love to go out and find things and then sort of like offer them back to the people who love them, which is what Horror Finds was all about. It was just a way for me to be able to be like, wow, I found the Time Cop novelization. Anybody looking for it? It was my storefront. But 10 years is a long time. What I do now, my actual career stuff, is starting to take over. And as fun as Horror Finds is, and it's always a great outlet for me, it actually has started to become a distraction from doing those other things. It's good self-care, but it also doesn't do a lot for me, and I spend more money sometimes than I get back. So Horror Finds is closing. Sorry, that was a lot. I'm really breaking it down for you. But Horror Finds is closing, and that's etsy.com/Horror Finds or some version of that. It's going to be closed May 31st. So right now, everything is 30% off. That last week in May, everything is 50% off. Things are already kind of flying away. So if you see something that you like, definitely snag it, and it would help me out a lot. So I don't have to donate that much or try to bring it elsewhere, and I just want it to go to a good home. So I've had a lot of fun doing it. We've had a lot of fun talking about it here on the show, and then having it at Creature Feature Weekend. I'm so thankful for anybody who gave a shit or just came to check out books or whatever, but it is closing down, so definitely check that out this week and before the end of May.
All right, well, go and check out and support it.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
And then let's talk about some last second recommendations. I genuinely can't remember if I recommended this first thing or not, so I'm going to quickly breeze through it just in case it's a repeat, and then I have one I know isn't a repeat. Did I talk about Becoming Immortal Bray Wyatt on this just yet, or no?
I don't think so.
No.
Doesn't ring a bell.
It's on Peacock.
You texted me, but we didn't talk about it on the show.
That's why I could not remember. It is I would argue it is the best documentary that has ever come out of the WWE. It is about the wrestler Bray Wyatt, who unfortunately passed away from COVID complications in, I want to say 2022. He had like a combination of like a heart attack first, and then while he was in the hospital for that, got COVID as well, and then it was a really rough story. Yeah. But the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm actually getting emotional and I'm crying because all I can think is like, this guy and us would have been friends. Like everything about him, like everything he did was tied to horror movies. And the very beginning, they're just talking about how we would just watch Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters over and over again and dress up like the Ghostbusters. And his dad was a wrestler, and he kept saying, like, one day I'm going to combine horror and wrestling. And his dad was like, those two worlds just don't work together. And, like, he kind of cracked the code on doing something that wasn't gimmicky and stupid, right? Because, like, most of the time it's like the boogeyman, and it's just a guy eating worms or whatever. Like, he came up with a way to do interesting, smart, funny, psychological horror in a wrestling ring, and it was amazing. And just watching how he worked with Tom Savini on all of it, and how like he brought together all these horror fans to like help him make his visions real. It's just a really powerful documentary. So I recommend that. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think you'll just fall in love with this person and be like, man, what a bummer that this person's not here anymore. But off of Scott's recommendation, I also watched Thanksgiving. And boy, can I not wait for 9 more years when we can do that as our November pick. Because that is, it's without competition, the best movie Eli Roth has ever made.
Boom.
Secondly, it is the most horror movie night shit that has ever been released mainstream in the last 10 years. It is every
Watching
kill
it on Netflix is insane.
Yeah, every kill is so gooey and fun. It's top tier. Great recommendation, Scott. I am screaming it to the ceiling and to the mountains and even higher to the clouds. Thanksgiving is a ton of fun. It is so much fun.
I also got into a little bit of referential stuff, but it's not as clear as Pray at Night or even what we referenced Behind the Mask and Town of Dread Sundown. But I saw Abigail, which I think by the time this comes out, it'll be out of theaters. But it is really fun. It's a super fun movie, and I think that it toes that lovely line of hey, vampires are an urban legend. What do we know about vampires? What works and doesn't work? Fighting this vampire ballerina. Yes, it's given away a little bit in the trailer. There's not much more that you need to kind of figure out going into the movie, but there's some really, really fun stuff. It was nonstop. I think also under 90 minutes or close to it. It's not, you don't have to watch it in a theater. I loved watching it in a theater. It was great, but I'm talking about it and you missed it. By the time I'm talking, it's gone, right? But it's really fun. Really enjoyed watching it. That's Abigail. One other thing about it though, that I rarely do I watch a movie that particularly a larger studio puts out that I'm which this wasn't a huge studio, but it just felt like they had more to talk about and more to say about a lot of the characters that got dropped to make the runtime. And I haven't felt that way in a long time about a movie, to be honest with you. I actually felt like there could have been a little bit more. It was fun.
I listened to an audiobook that I had been... I don't know why it took me so long to finally just listen to it, but The King in Yellow, which is by Robert W. Chambers. It was published in 1895, and so it's weird fiction. It's supernatural horror and weird fiction, and it was one of the big influences on Lovecraft. It's really good. Surprisingly, stands the test of time. I really like weird fiction. I forget how much I like weird fiction in short format because when done well, it has aspects of horror, sci-fi, ghosts, dark romance, monsters. It's got so much going on that it does kind of keep you on your toes because you're not sure what angle a story is going to take. And the coolest thing about The King in Yellow is that it's a collection of short stories, and The King in Yellow is a play that is referenced in every single short story because it's kind of like a play that drives the reader mad. But there's no... You don't ever hear the entirety of The King in Yellow. You just hear pieces of it. So it's kind of like this...
It's a little Channel Zero-y.
Yes.
Huh? It's yeah.
It's it's a background character. The play is a background influence in the entire
first season of Channel Zero. But yes,
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because the yellow sign and The King in Yellow and a lot of these motifs show up in weird horror or weird fiction rather a lot. There are these templates, and even Sister Maiden Monster that I read back in, I want to say that was November or December of last year. They referenced the yellow sign in it, and it's cool because it's cool in such a way to me that it's become a motif that is open source. It's almost like the idea of The King in Yellow and the yellow sign and these motifs, like I'm saying, they aren't owned by anyone. They're part of this overarching zeitgeist in weird fiction and horror and Lovecraftian horror that you can use more so than Cthulhu, because Cthulhu really is Lovecraft. I know that other people worked in the Cthulhu mythos, and they and it does kind of get like name dropped, and the entity exists outside of just Lovecraft and his contemporaries. But The King in Yellow kind of is bigger than that, where that entity and those concepts, since they informed Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, they are almost like vampires. Like, I really found The King in Yellow to be captivating.
That's interesting what you're saying about Cthulhu, because I understand exactly what you mean. It's like Lovecraft still does have such a firm print on what Cthulhu is, but this sounds more of, like this very open, flowy, sort of ambiguous thing that you can add to that doesn't necessarily change anybody else's version of it. Like, which is so funny that we were just talking about that with vampires too. Like with Abigail. Like Abigail is like, you took some and you left some.
Yes.
You referred to all of them, but like, that's I like stuff like that.
You could say that you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. And speaking of the facts of life, The Stranger's Prey at Night teaches us the facts of how to survive in our life. Baseball bats and trunks. So stay tuned next week for more horror movie night goodness.
We're making an ad.
Napping ad.
This is where I think if we're doing it right, Alec Baldwin comes in. He says a couple things. He listens to the podcast every week. Has he been canceled? Wait, is Alec Baldwin the one who killed somebody? I hear that Gary Sinise is free.
Oh, okay, great.
He hasn't worked since 2020.
So, what would be the script that we would have Gary Sinise say for the Napping Through Happy Hour podcast?
Listen to this damn show. Damn it.
The Napping Through Happy Hour podcast, brought to you by Geekscape.
Real life, real drama, real time.
I'm Gary Sinise.
That's the ad. That's the ad. That's the ad.
It is mind-blowing
And heartbreaking.
how many original scripts are written every year but are never made.
So we seek out these scripts and bring them to life with full audio production and professional actors.
Check us out at Undiscovered Scripts,
Movies made of paper.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Free.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.